Europe, and so it feels right that I'm in Berlin today as the place to give the first public speech of a serving Director General of MI5 outside the UK. So thank you, Hans-Georg, for the invitation. And as you said earlier, I'm glad to be here honouring my promise to come. So thank you. Today I want to offer my reflections, of course, on our subject today, which is the shared hybrid threats that European nations face, from hostile activity by states, but also from international terrorism. I also want to talk about how a joined-up today. I believe the phrase in German is Zusammenarbeit, to be delivering success together where delivering it alone is just not possible. So first, the current threat landscape. We're living in a period where Europe faces sustained threats and sustained hostile activity from certain states. And let me be clear, by this I don't just mean spies spying on other spies, spies following each other around at the dead of night. I mean the deliberate, targeted, malign activity intended to undermine our free, open and democratic societies, to destabilize the international rules-based system that underpins our stability, security and prosperity. The chief protagonist amongst these hostile actors today is the Russian government. Notice I don't say Russia. The United Kingdom has the utmost admiration and respect for the people of Russia, for their proud culture and long history. I myself studied the Russian language at school. We have no desire to escalate tensions or to go back to the tense and dangerous times that Europe lived through during the Cold War. Berlin, more than most cities, knows what that felt like. One of the Kremlin's central and entirely admirable aims is to build Russian greatness on the world stage. There are ways open for it to do that as part of the rules-based order. But its repeated choices have been to pursue that aim through aggressive and pernicious actions by its military and intelligence services. Instead of becoming a respected great nation, it risks becoming a more isolated pariah. We want cordial relations with the Russian government and for it to live up to its international obligations, taking its place on the world stage in the rules-based order. We look forward to that day, but our respect for Russia's people and desire for a productive relationship cannot and must not stop us from calling out and pushing back on the Kremlin's flagrant breaches of international rules. Leaders across Europe and the world have taken a stand. They've sent a strong message that the first use of a nerve agent in Europe since the Second World War and supporting and protecting the Syrian regime's horrific use of chemical weapons to kill and maim civilians is simply not acceptable. But also, the Russian government's invasion of Crimea, the taking of territory from another sovereign European country by force, cannot be acceptable. Seeking to interfere with legitimate democratic elections in the US and in France is not acceptable. Attempting to mount a coup against the elected government of Montenegro is not acceptable, and neither is unleashing cyber attacks of the sort that you've already heard about this morning against our countries and institutions, including the attacks that you've heard about against German institutions like the Bundestag here in Berlin. Our adversaries have proven to be early adopters of technology, particularly internet technologies, those extraordinary and exciting advances that increasingly power our economies and our lives. Age-old attempts at covert influence and propaganda have been supercharged in online disinformation, which can be churned out at massive scale and pace and little cost. The aim is to sow doubt by flat denials of the truth, to dilute truth with falsehood, divert attention to fake stories, and do all they can to divide alliances. Barefaced lying seems to be the default mode, coupled with ridicule of critics. The Russian state's now well-practiced doctrine of blending media manipulation, social media disinformation, and distortion, along with new and old forms of espionage and high levels of cyber attacks, military force, and criminal thuggery, is what is meant these days by the term hybrid threats. In the UK, we saw this approach again in Salisbury. The reckless attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal using a highly lethal nerve agent put numerous lives at risk, including that of his daughter. It was only through near miraculous medical intervention that his and his daughter's lives were saved and wider preventive action was able to be taken. The attack was swiftly followed by a cynical and distasteful information campaign to sow confusion and doubt. The Russian state's media outlets and representatives have propagated at least 30 different so-called explanations in their efforts to mislead the world and their own people. One media survey in the UK found that 2/3 of social media output at the peak of the Salisbury story came from Russian government-controlled accounts. Whatever nonsense they conjure up, the case is clear. Similarly, after the sickening attack on the people of Duma in Syria, the Russian state machine pumped out a torrent of lies aimed at undermining international consensus and well-established systems to protect innocent civilians from chemical weapons. Our democracies, our societies, and our bonds of partnership are strong, but we must not be complacent about the longer-term potential impact of this activity, whether by those in Russia, in Iran, or beyond, on the international rules-based order that supports our security and prosperity. We are all used to living in free societies with democratic governments that operate on a strong foundation of openness, integrity, and accountability, within a system of law with strong checks and balances. That's the context for MI5 as well. But all of that is entirely alien territory to our adversaries. Along with this state-level hostile activity, as we've heard this morning, Europe faces an intense, unrelenting and multidimensional terrorist threat. Daesh continues to pose the most acute threat, but Al-Qaeda and other Islamist terrorist groups haven't gone away. With the police, we're also actively monitoring the trajectory of extreme right-wing terrorism. As we see instances of it rearing its ugly head, our response is equally firm. The sickening impact, shock and disgust of terrorism has been felt right across Europe. Just 2 days ago, Paris saw another brutal attack. And since 2016, there have now been 45 separate attacks across 7 European countries. The UK, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, Sweden and Finland have all seen attacks. This, of course, includes the despicable attack on the 19th of December 2016 here in Berlin, in which 12 people lost their lives. It also includes the disgusting attacks the British public suffered last year. Next week marks 1 year since the barbaric attack on the Manchester Arena. 22 people lost their lives, and many more were left with life-changing physical and psychological injuries. These people, many who were young children, were simply enjoying an evening out at a concert with families and friends. The 13 people killed in 2 attacks in London last year were also just going about their everyday lives. They were from the UK, Spain, France, the United States, Australia, Canada, and Romania. Many of those indiscriminately killed and injured were citizens of our flourishing and diverse European democracies. We remember those who lost their lives in these senseless attacks across Europe. I know that MI5 and our European partners feel the impact personally as well as professionally. It redoubles our shared determination and energy to defeat this menace and the threat it poses to our societies. This unprecedented tempo of attack planning shows no signs of abating. In the UK alone, since the Westminster attack in March last year, with the police we've thwarted a further 12 Islamist terror plots. 12 occasions where we have good reason to believe a terrorist attack would otherwise have taken place in our country. That brings the total number of disrupted attacks in the UK since 2013 to 25. This upshift in threat is, of course, driven by Daesh's murderous ideology. Whilst Daesh has now lost its false caliphate in its strongholds in Syria and Iraq, tackling the group as a movement will require sustained international focus for years to come. As I speak today, they are seeking to regroup, and the threat seems likely to persist. I describe the terrorist threat as three-dimensional because plots germinate at home, abroad, and online. Terrorism operates across those three spaces. Online, Daesh pumps out its vile propaganda and practical instruction. Daesh's twisted ideology continues to influence vulnerable and violent individuals across Europe and beyond to use crude but deadly methods to kill, from stabbings to vehicle attacks, from bullets to bombs, from hard to soft targets. In Syria and other spaces of low or no governance, Daesh still aspires to generate and direct devastating and more complex attacks. Terrorism is not new, but amplified and accelerated by the reach and tempo of technological change. Today it is more global, more multidimensional, and of a different order of pace and intensity than Hans-Georg and I have seen in our careers. I'm conscious that I've so far painted a rather bleak picture, and maybe that's an occupational hazard for people in the jobs that Hans-Georg and I and our other colleagues here do. The threat landscape I've described is shared across the nations of Europe, and that is how we address it. The picture is dynamic, and it can at times be dazzlingly complex, all the time shifting form and flitting across borders, straddling the cyber and real worlds, part in the light and part inhabiting the murky corners of the internet. Our talented police and intelligence colleagues across Europe who combat the scourges of child sex exploitation, serious and organised crime, and modern slavery are working against a similar canvas. It may therefore come as a surprise to you when I say that I'm confident about our ability to tackle these new shapes of threat. I'm confident because of the commitment, talent, and skill of the people working against these threats. I'm confident because of the strength and resilience of our democratic systems, and the resilience of our societies, and the support of the public. I'm also confident because of the robust framework of law, oversight, transparency, and accountability that UK agencies work within, and the values that we share with our European partners. But I'm particularly confident because I firmly believe in the power of partnerships. By thickening existing partnerships, developing new ones, and working in new and different ways, we can find and stop the vast majority of those seeking to do us all harm. Partnerships are at the heart of our work. In the UK, MI5 is very closely partnered with SIS, with GCHQ, and with our police and military colleagues across all areas of our work. We're working ever more closely and innovatively with both central government and local agencies, whether calling out hostile propaganda by malign states or supporting individuals at risk of being radicalized to the point of violence. Our partnerships with industry and academia are developing in truly exciting ways as we together build capabilities and solve intelligence challenges right at the vanguard of science and technology. And our relationships with social media companies and communication service providers remain as critical as ever. We're committed to working with them as they look to fulfill their ethical responsibility to prevent terrorist, hostile state and criminal exploitation of internet-carried services, shining a light on terrorists and paedophiles, taking down bomb-making instructions, warning the authorities about attempts to acquire explosives precursors. All of this matters, and there's a great deal more to do. And also, while I'm thinking of those that we depend on, I want to take just a moment to pay tribute to the extraordinary, brave and skilled help that we're given by members of the public who work with us as agents, as human sources, to whom we owe so much of our success in protecting society. And I thank them for their commitment and their courage. Today, standing in Berlin, reflecting on the acute shared security threats we face, it is, of course, our vital European partnerships that are at the front of my mind. For many years, we in partner services, like the BFV and the other services present today, have worked to develop and invest in strong intelligence and security partnerships across Europe, bilaterally, multilaterally, and working with EU institutions. In today's uncertain world, we all need that shared strength more than ever. As Prime Minister Theresa May said in Florence, these are challenges to our shared European interests and values that we can only solve in partnership. Our democracy, prosperity and security all depend on collaboration to address these threats. I personally believe there has been too little public explanation of the depth and quality of intelligence and security cooperation within Europe. Maybe that's understandable because so much of it is necessarily secret. But there is much that we can say. I've heard our European partnerships sometimes characterized dismissively in terms of simple intelligence sharing, maybe swapping a document here or a phone number or email address there, passing tip-offs between us where necessary. But this totally misrepresents and underdescribes the advanced arrangements, systems and structures that European security services have together built and that we need to continue to build on to keep pace with shifting threats and technologies. European intelligence cooperation today is simply unrecognizable to what it looked like even 5 years ago. The vast majority of my intelligence officers in MI5 will spend huge chunks of their careers working collaboratively with European colleagues. I'd like to tell you a bit more about what this collaboration actually looks like and what I mean by it. First, bilateral cooperation means building on our shared values and respect for the law so that together we make the best use of each other's knowledge, skills and capabilities to keep our countries safe. I can say confidently that the way we work together has prevented loss of life in Europe. It means that we align our strategic interests and concentrate effort on the most pressing risks and challenges. It means my senior team engaged in substantial work programs with our European counterparts on data, on capabilities, on policy and compliance. It means welcoming some European colleagues to MI5's Intelligence Officer Training Programme and sharing our methods and practices, and MI5 learning from exchanges with our European colleagues. It means working together jointly on investigations and collection operations to deliver results and disruptions. Indeed, we have another session here in Germany soon. Together we'll be building on recent joint work on running and protecting the human sources who risk their lives to protect us. And we will be continuing to learn from each other's methodology on spotting so-called lone actors. These partnerships also mean being there for each other when times are tough. I was overwhelmed by the generous support that poured in from my European colleagues, including many here today, following the terrorist attacks in the UK last year. And it wasn't just sentiment. BFV and the others made a material contribution to supporting our investigations into those attacks, including the Manchester attack. In the same vein, I've willingly sent MI5 officers to other European cities to support our friends following terrorist attacks in other countries. Our multilateral collaboration is also increasingly critical to operational success, particularly through the Counter-Terrorism Group, or CTG, which is made up of 30 European domestic security services. The CTG is the largest multinational CT intelligence enterprise in the world, with thousands of exchanges on advanced secure networks every week. This multilateral cooperation doesn't look like frosty gatherings of strangers reading out national positions at each other around a big table. What I'm talking about is intelligence officers from 30 countries permanently co-located together as a joint operational platform. It looks like real-time intelligence sharing and agreeing joint tactics to combine each country's resources to best effect. It looks like professionals from all across Europe who know and trust each other, working together and sharing data on shared systems about terrorist fighters dispersing from Syria. It looks like developing new ways to run and deconflict human intelligence operations together. And it looks like thwarted and terrorists arrested who could not otherwise have been found in time by any one nation acting alone. This highly developed national security collaboration largely takes place outside EU structures and doesn't depend on membership. So at the primary level, Brexit makes no difference to the strength of those partnerships. But that is not the whole story. National level and multilateral security work between European nations draws strength from a range of important EU systems and arrangements. Exchanging data through EU law enforcement databases and passenger name records on the travel of terrorist subjects across Europe provides vital intelligence. Practical cooperation to efficiently arrest and surrender terrorists and criminals using the European arrest warrant enables the swift delivery of justice. And our exchanges with Europol and other EU bodies, where the UK is a major contributor, make us all safer. The UK is, of course, leaving the EU, and our relationship with the EU must change as a result. But as our government has said many times, we are not leaving Europe. In the Prime Minister's speech in Munich, she signalled the government's intent to sustain this mutually beneficial cooperation and develop a UK-EU treaty on internal security, building on our unique history of partnership. MI5 and my SIS and GCHQ colleagues are absolutely and necessarily committed to continuing to develop our contribution to collective security. That is what the threats require. It is an unconditional commitment. we must not risk the loss of mutual capability or weakening of collective effort across Europe. I don't do politics, but it is, of course, political arrangements, laws and treaties that permit or constrain what we can do together as agencies protecting our countries and Europe. So it's as a security practitioner that I hope for a comprehensive and enduring agreement that tackles obstacles and allows the professionals to get on with the job together. We owe that to all our citizens across Europe. I started out today by describing the shifting threat landscape and the impact of technology. An intense and diverse terrorist threat with plots that can come at us more quickly and which can be harder to detect. Cyber threats that defy geography, and how the Russian state and others seek to undermine the international...
Well, what we've been watching is a historic first, the first time that a Director General of MI5, the Domestic British Security Service, has addressed a public conference outside of the UK. Andrew Parker there appealing for continued cooperation at the highest level following Brexit, also making it clear that he believes there are a number of threats, saying that in the past year or so 12 IS-inspired plots have been foiled by the security services, and also berating the Russians over Salisbury and other attacks. Well, let's get reaction now from our key correspondents on these matters, Mark Stone in Brussels and our defence correspondent Alistair Bunkle